Welcome to the Tax Professionals Podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Would you like a better work-life balance but constantly find yourself working more than you'd like? Maybe you have a fear of saying no, or maybe you have a fear of being seen as lazy if you leave work on time, or fear of letting your colleagues down. You may feel like your work-life balance is in the hands of others, your employer, manager, or others, but the one person who is responsible is you. You must take control, you must set the boundaries, you must stick to them. This episode's guest, Jo Moorhan, understands firsthand that it can be difficult to get the balance that you want. She has worked in senior tax roles for over 20 years, including a head of tax role at BP. Career-wise, this was great, but during this time, Jo realised that she didn't have a work-life balance which was right for her. Realising that it was her responsibility, she took the boat by the helm and drastically improved the balance in her life. Fast forward to 2020, Jo no longer works in tax and instead helps tax, finance and similar professionals to obtain what they want out of their career and life, and is a regular contributor to the Tax Advisor magazine. A key area that Jo helps people with is improving their work-life balance, a work-life blend as Jo likes to call it. In this episode, Jo provides advice and tips to help you to discover and start obtaining the work-life balance that you want. Work-life balance is unique to you. Jo appreciates that there will, of course, be unavoidable situations where you will have to work late on a particular day despite taking steps to prevent it. This is part and parcel of working in the tax profession, although you could make it the exception. But when standing back and taking a look as a whole, you'll be able to obtain a balance that you are happy with. Just before we get into the episode, if you're looking to progress your tax career at a pace of your choosing towards a job that will fit in with your career objectives and lifestyle goals, then you'll be interested in this free course I've created. It will allow you to take your career into your own hands and move towards your ideal job. In the course, you will understand the possible directions to take your career in which align with your career objectives and lifestyle goals. You will decide what you need to do to work towards the job that you want, either short term or long term, your choice. You will also create your very own professional development plan to keep you focused and progressing towards your chosen job at the speed set by you. You can get access to the course by going to the show notes for this episode, which is at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP13. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP13, which stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast Episode 13. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. Hi Jo, thanks for joining me today and welcome to the Tax Professionals Podcast.
Hi, thanks for asking me.
It's no problem at all. It's a pleasure to have you on, and I'm sure we're in for a fun episode today. When people ask you, what do you do? How do you usually respond?
I'm a career coach, so I help people get what they want in their career and be as effective as they can be at work.
And I think you used to work in tax yourself, didn't you, before becoming
Yes.
a coach? What made the switch for you?
Well, I realised that I'd fallen out of love with tax, reading the legislation, interpreting the legislation, and more particularly trying to persuade the business that I was in, BP, to follow the tax advice, because of course they never wanted to if it was not what they wanted to do. They would follow it if it was going to save them money and it happened to coincide with their business objectives. But I just grew a bit tired really of all the persuading that was needed. And I really liked the people side of my job. I had a team and I really liked helping them develop. So I thought, why don't I just focus on that? So that's why I retrained.
Do you tend to have quite a few people who work in tax that you coach now then?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely tax or similar disciplines. So people who are experts, whether that's lawyers, sometimes financial traders, financial analysts, engineers, people in finance directors, that the sort of financial specialist world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect match to speak to the audience of tax professionals then.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely know the tax professional world, having been there for 20 odd years. Yes.
It's a long time.
Yes. Yes.
So one of the kind of specialisms that I've noticed that you have is in relation to helping people to get a work-life balance, or work-life blend, as I know you like to call it. So that's what we will cover today. I think it's a subject that probably a lot of people who work in tax will be interested in, because at times I think it can be quite difficult to get that balance in tax. You have clients that are quite demanding, a lot of pressures on the job, and sometimes you can't help but work longer hours.
Sure.
So just in relation to work-life balance, then what does it mean to you when you talk about a work-life balance?
To me, it's about having time and energy to do the stuff I want to do outside of work, and also to be enjoying my work. So minimizing the time, even in my present role, that I spend on doing the stuff that I don't really like so much. So, which is now the admin.
No one likes admin, do they?
No, well, some people do, but yeah, that's the bit that I don't like so much. I like being with my clients.
So your work-life balance now is more about, I suppose, doing those things that you enjoy in your job, and also the things outside of your job that you like to do.
Yeah, but I think even now, being self-employed, and everybody else, it's a case of making the time and setting the boundaries and priorities, because, and unless one does that, it doesn't happen. I could carry on working past 5 or 6 if I wanted to, but I don't. I just stop myself and decide that it doesn't really need doing today.
No, I think probably actually because of a lot of people working from home at the moment, because of the whole coronavirus situation, probably a lot of people are struggling to set those boundaries, because kind of the whole day just runs into one massive blob, I suppose.
Yes,
you feel like you're working all the time, so setting those boundaries will definitely be important. But why do you think it's important then to have a work-life balance, I suppose, particularly for people who work in tax?
Well, I think you'll be unhappy. You'll wear yourself out. You'll be stressed. You'll have limited energy. And I think one can do that for a while, which is why I prefer to call it blend, because I think balance implies that it should always be in balance, and it's like an end point to be strived for. Whereas I think it's more about having a blend overall. So if one works really hard, let's say for 2 weeks, a lot of overtime, then after that, making sure you have time to recover, slow down, and then you might have another peak. But I think of it more in the round, more in the longer term. Am I, and are you, the listeners, are you spending time on what you want to spend it on, or not?
Yeah, so that's a bit of a different perspective to, I think, what a lot of people would have when they talk about a work-life balance, because I suppose a lot of people would look at it in terms of each day rather than, say, over a month, which is kind of what you're more talking about there, I think, isn't it?
Longer term, yeah. I don't think it's possible for it always to be as you want it to be every single day.
Yeah, but we're also aiming for that overall. And because, as you say, really, if you don't do that, then you're going to have limited energy, burnout, and that's going to make you less effective in both your work and personal life.
Yeah.
What do you think are the key reasons that people struggle to achieve their desired work-life balance, to make sure that they stay energized and avoid burnout?
Well, I'll tell you a little story about me. When I didn't have the work-life balance I wanted, so let's say when I was a tax director at BP, I worked long hours, and I would say to myself, it was them making me work long hours. The workload that I'd been given, the fact that such a project needed delivering, the fact that so-and-so was ill, etc., etc. So I was blaming outside things. So what made the biggest difference to me was to realize that actually it was my responsibility. So my boss could still be giving me exactly the same piece of work with the same deadline, but I could decide that I was going to do it to 80% of my normal standard.
Yeah.
And get myself a better work-life balance. I could decide to say to the internal business, I'm sorry, you can't have that today. It's going to take X days longer. But I wouldn't do it because I didn't really want the conflict. But when I realized I had more control and more power than I thought I did, then that's when things changed for me.
So you think it's people kind of leave their own work-life balance destiny in other people's hands rather than take control of it themselves?
I think we have a tendency, yes, because it requires us to change some wiring in our head.
Mm-hmm. Do you think people become worried at the thought of maybe giving 80%, as you've suggested there, or even, asking for an extension on a deadline or something along those lines?
Well, I think they do. And the reason I say that is because I certainly used to, and so do a lot of clients that I work with. I used to think, well, my boss wouldn't like it, or the client wouldn't like it. I wouldn't get a good performance review. People would think I wasn't committed. I wasn't going to get promoted. People would think I was lazy. All sorts of internal stuff going on in my head. And the revelation was when I actually decided, per my standards, to do things to 80%, which was actually quite a big thing for me. Like I wouldn't read that report yet again. I would think, okay, it's done, it's adequate. No one noticed. And everybody thought I was still doing as good a job as I was doing. So I was really surprised. I was like, wow, so it really is all in my head.
Yeah. And was that the same with any of the other things as well that you thought?
It was actually, I think, what I came to realise, and this is, I've done as a coach, I've done a lot of personal development work, as you'd probably expect. We all wire certain thoughts into our brains unconsciously. We don't even realise. And we've got a soundtrack running to our lives. And I was telling myself internally that I was lazy and that I was stupid. And so the reason I would work hard and want to do things perfectly was to prove to myself that I wasn't lazy and I wasn't stupid. And in my experience, everybody has their own version of that. Everybody has their own thing they're accusing themselves of. And the reason we drive ourselves and take on behaviours and act in the way that we say we don't want to is because we're trying to prove, I call it the critical inner voice, wrong. All of this, though, is going on at quite an unconscious level.
Yeah. So then, because it is at a subconscious level, I suppose it's hard to recognise what you're doing. So let's say you've got someone who wants to have a better work-life balance or blend. How can they go about that? How can they go about realising that they've got all these internal things that they're telling themselves that aren't true? And how can they go about changing it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, firstly, I think it's important to recognise it's going to take some effort. And what I like to think of is, I call them triggers. So let's imagine the situation that you've told yourself you're going to go home on time today. So not early. Let's say you're going to go home at 5:30. And your manager or your boss comes over at 3 p.m. and says, such client wants this thing doing, and can you do it today? Yeah. All of you wants to say no, and yet you find yourself saying yes. So that's a trigger point. When the boss says to you, can you do it today? What I would suggest is slowing down and capturing through journaling what that automatic reaction is. There'll be something that's going on. There'll be something to do with the tone of voice that the person asks you, their face. Something will trigger that freeze, fight, or flight reaction in you, and you'll find yourself saying yes. There'll probably be uncomfortable emotions, and there'll also be thoughts like, I have to say yes or else he'll think such a thing. It's about capturing all that down first of all, and then analysing it and starting to unpick it. So I'd recommend people get themselves a little notebook to carry around and notice triggers for a period of time, let's say 2 to 3 weeks, write them all down in as much detail as possible, looking at the thoughts, the emotions, and what was happening around you, and then start to spot the themes and work out how you're going to unpick all this. And sometimes it's easy to unpick it, but often it isn't.
Yeah. I mean, are there any typical triggers that you see with people you coach that come up time and time again?
Well, the one I mentioned definitely does, when people believe they're being put under pressure and, they're expected to say yes, but they want to say no. That's definitely one of them.
Yeah.
I think quite a few people have a thing. I used to have a thing about people in authority, thinking I had to please people in authority.
Yeah.
Then there are triggers around not wanting to upset someone, or, let's say at a social level, you're invited out to dinner. Some people will say yes when they don't want to go.
Yeah.
And then, but come on, people, get real. This is your life. Where are you spending your time? Are you really spending your time on things you don't want to do?
Mm-hmm. Comes back to taking that control yourself, doesn't it, really? But you mentioned an interesting point there about people of authority. So let's say in a general tax practice, that could be a partner, couldn't it, for example? Is there anything that you think people can do to kind of manage the expectation more of a partner and, say something in a polite way? If they couldn't do that report on that evening, for example, is there anything they could say to try and help the situation?
Yes, I did a talk recently on how to say no, which is for the network group IP Inclusive, and it is available on their website. And one of the things I did was Google ways that you can say no in a nice way. And I would suggest that people do the same and come up with your go-to phrase of how you could say no. And you're probably not, in fact, saying no. So one of the phrases I really liked, which was quite funny, so you'd need to have a good relationship with this person, was to say, I wish there were two of me.
That's a good one.
But something perhaps that would work more practically in the tax world would be to say, well, thank you for thinking of me, but I've got my workload full at the moment. Could you give it to someone else right now and think of me next time? Or something like, thank you for thinking of me. I'd really like to do it, but I can't do it today. How about Friday? So it's more of an opening to a negotiation.
Yeah, I think probably in a lot of cases, if a partner comes to you and says that like the deadline or it needs doing today, people think it must be done. But for all you know, I suppose the partner could be trying to manage his own workload, and he knows he's not going to review it until next week anyway. And if you get that information, then I suppose it's a win-win on both sides, because you're still getting it on time, and you're not having to sacrifice your evening when you've got something else planned.
Exactly. And I think it's completely fine to talk about work-life balance in an open way. So if a partner asked you, you could say, thank you for thinking of me. I'm really sorry, but as you know, I've got, let's say, one child, and today's my day to go home and do bath and bedtime, say. I think it's perfectly reasonable. Would the partner really want you to miss that? Probably not. They'd probably think, okay, I'll come up with another solution.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I suppose they don't want to damage the relationship between you and them either. You've got a working relationship and you probably spend a lot of time working with each other.
Exactly. And the firms all want to help people, and I really firmly believe they do. They want to help their employees, us, get a whole rounded life. And it's part of the looking after the well-being of their staff, listening and taking personal situation and circumstances into account.
So when you've given someone that advice then in a way to say no, what type of reactions do they get from people when they try it? Do they come back and say, I can't believe that worked? Do they ever give you any feedback on it?
Yes, most people will say, I can't believe how easy that was. And why didn't I do it before? So somebody who I worked with wanted to go back to work, so a woman, part-time after maternity leave, and she'd gone back part-time already. This was to one of the big four firms, but it wasn't working for her. You know, her job load and the team she was in, it wasn't really doing it for her. And she was really worried about having the conversation, because she thought, well, they've already let me come back part-time. I think it was 4 days a week. She wanted to go to 3 days a week. And when she had the conversation, she couldn't believe that it was fine, and they agreed straight away. You know, they just basically said, yes, how can we make this work? And that was because she sold it to them. You know, she explained what the issues was for her, and how that was affecting her work for the firm, and how if it could be changed, she could do better, more effective work for the firm.
Yeah, I think sometimes we can forget that actually people can be quite reasonable, and they're not going to try and do something which is going to be to the detriment of their firm and to their staff. So I'm sure you've got plenty of other examples of similar gist. So I did see from an article you sent over to me that you pulled together an article with some great tips on how people can go about getting the work-life balance that they want.
Is that the one called The Real Truth About Work-Life Balance? Yeah, that's on my website, yeah.
What are some of your best tips to help people get that work-life balance that they want?
I think what's really important, what I'd encourage people to do, is imagine what their ideal work day or working week would look like. So close your eyes, run it through in your mind. What would it be like? And the reason I suggest this is because it's really lovely to have an active vision that you can work towards and pull towards for yourself. And as part of that, you can develop a go-to phrase for yourself around, well, what is your, I'm going to call it mantra for yourself, that you can remind yourself of a little phrase when you notice yourself not having the work-life blend that you want, when you notice yourself about to stay late in the office. What are you going to say to yourself to remind yourself what it is you want? So a phrase for me might be, it's my life. It's my life. It's my life. And I say that over and over to myself, and then I make a decision that's more conducive to me. And I think each person can develop their own little go-to phrase that they find motivating and also reassuring, because this is about habit change, and it doesn't necessarily happen overnight.
Yeah, as you say, it's my life. That's a great way to think about it, to not let other people take control of it for you. What about in relation to, I think you called it dead time, which I think is probably commuting time, for example, time that otherwise wouldn't be spent very well?
Yes. I read a really great book, which I highly recommend. It's called The 4-Hour Work Week, and it's by Tim Ferriss. And there are some really great tips in there about how you how you schedule your priorities. That's it. So you don't prioritize your schedule, you schedule your priorities. So let's say I want to learn Spanish. So I want to book some time in my diary where I will learn Spanish. And I encourage you all to look at dead time. So when you're waiting for the tube, don't be scrolling randomly through your work emails or your personal emails or go on social media. Instead, learn some Spanish. 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day, constant, consistent learning will get you where you want to get. And it's the same with achieving your work-life balance. If there's something really important for you, I want you to think about how you can wedge that in to all the little minutes in your days, in your life that you have, that you're just wasting because you're not being as focused as you could be.
Yeah, I think I could have a completely different episode just in relation to wasting time on social media, especially for my generation, as we've grown up with it. But all those little 5 minutes here and there, they add up, don't they? To probably quite a few hours over the day. So utilising that on something that's a priority you instead would obviously be really useful.
Exactly. Yes, and then you'll feel really good at the end of the day because you'll have done your 10 minutes on learning Spanish or whatever it is.
Yeah, which you would otherwise
wouldn't have done. Exactly. Yeah.
So one of the problems I think I've seen personally when it comes to wanting to get a good work-life balance or blend, and then because they end up working longer hours because they haven't really managed their workload very well.
What, taken on too much stuff, do you mean?
Maybe taken on too much, which we've already talked about saying no. Maybe they haven't thought about the best way to use their time in a week, so they've been distracted or haven't set aside time to work on those important tasks that needed in the week. Have you got any advice for people to become better at managing their workload that they've already got, rather than just saying no in this case?
Oh yeah, that's a topic in its own right as well, isn't it? Yeah. There's I'll tell you what I use myself, which I found very useful. It's let's think. One technique is called eat 3 frogs. So when you come into work each day, you don't look in your emails first thing. You instead do 3 things that are your priority things for that day. So if, for example, you've been, you need to work on a big project and it's going to take hours and that's daunting for you, one of your 3 things would be, let's say, spending 20 minutes or half an hour on that project. Yeah, so you're making some progress on it. And you do these 3 things or eat these 3 frogs before you open your emails. So the idea is that you've done the frogs, the horrible things first, and then you feel really good for the rest of the day. And when I apply this, I like to spend half an hour to an hour before I open my emails, and then I'll open them. Another tip is to only open your emails and look in them, let's say, at scheduled periods in the day. So I would advise 3 times a day. So once, say, at 10 o'clock, once at, 1 p.m, and possibly once at 5. And you spend a designated amount of time, my suggestion would be 20 minutes, and you're really, really focused. And at that point, you're just triaging your emails. So if there's an email that you can respond to straight away, you just do it and you respond. Or if it's a more long-winded email, you flag it for follow-up because it's a new piece of work in itself, or you forward it on to somebody else. And the idea is to just, in a very focused way, triage what's in your inbox and then go back to your own priorities. So you're trying to stop yourself getting distracted and working on what's important to you and what's important for your workload. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I actually spoke to a productivity coach on the podcast as well as one of the first episodes, and he basically said the exact same thing as what you've just said there.
Okay.
Which is to not get bogged down with emails, kind of take control of them rather than let them take control of you, which is pretty much, I think, what you've just said, by scheduling those times and then kind of sticking to it.
And another thing would be on the telephone. So minimizing on the telephone, like getting to the point quickly and getting it done, whatever you're talking about with somebody, rather than letting the phone call expand. A bit like emails, it can expand to however long you want it to expand if you've got a chatty person. But if you say to yourself, I'm going to make this phone call, it's going to be over in 10 minutes, I imagine it will be.
Yeah. Think about what you want to get out of it up front.
Yes, exactly. So that was your question about managing a workload that you've got, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, a thought I've had, I don't know how you feel about this, but asking for support from colleagues if you've got too much on yourself,
Yes.
is that something you would recommend doing? I think a lot of people shy away from it, don't they?
I'd definitely recommend doing that. Yeah. And my tip would be is to enroll the person into helping you by helping them see what they're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
That might be experience in a new area, or how nice it will be to work together, or you notice they've got a particular strength, for example, in analysis, and so you'd love them to help you because they get to practice their strength.
All nice things to try there.
They do work, actually. Everybody likes to be flattered.
Yeah, absolutely. don't we know it? And then another point I thought about was maybe people not delegating properly. Do you think that can contribute to poor management of workload as well?
Yes, I do. Yes. I'll say what I see, and you can tell me what you see. I see people putting it off because they think it's quicker for me to do it myself.
Yeah.
Do you see that?
And that kind of, I think, misses the point a bit with delegation. I could go on about this on a completely different tangent, but delegating, sometimes you need to put the time into someone to train them how to do it as well. I think that short-minded view sometimes might be better in that 1 week where you say it is quicker to do it, but say 3 months down the line, when you've got someone who you've supported and trained, it should be saving you bags of time.
Yes, exactly. It does save time in the long run, and you'll probably find that the upfront effort isn't as much as we often will think it is. Again, it's our brain catastrophizing. The critical inner voice will say, you haven't got time for this, they're going to have too many questions, blah, 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 blah. And most of this is catastrophizing and made it up. And if you are clear and you brief the person and you've got a good working relationship with them and they know they can come and ask you questions or for help, I'm sure it would work.
Yeah, I completely agree on that one. Completely agree. So working in tax anyway, there's inevitably going to be a time where you come under a lot of pressure to do a piece of work urgently, and we've already talked about that when it's coming from a partner, say, or someone in-house. But what about where it's a client who's asking for something quickly? Is there anything you can do in that circumstance to help manage that client pressure and their expectations, to help you not have to stay super late on that one evening that you want to go home on time?
Well, an anecdote for you from when I was early on in my career at Coopers and Lybrand. I had an insurance company client, and we, the partner and I, had agreed that they would get this piece of advice by, let's say it was Friday. And I realised probably on Tuesday that I wasn't going to make it. And I had a good relationship with the client. So I phoned up the client and said, I'm sorry, we're not going to get it to you by Friday. Is that okay? And he said, yes. So we agreed, let's say Tuesday. And I remember this particular instance because I then phoned him up again on Monday and I said, I'm sorry, it's still not going to be ready by Tuesday. And, he'd told me that it wasn't needed urgently. They just wanted to move it along. And he said, okay, that's fine. So I think we agreed on the second Friday, So I think there's a difference between, I think it's important to know what is going on at the client side, because that piece of advice, it didn't matter. And we had a relationship, so he could tell me that. But sometimes it clearly will matter, won't it? There's a deadline, there's a board meeting. It really is needed. And I think it's about finding out when those situations are, and then, of course, pulling out all the stops and sorry, you do have to work late, versus you imagining that's the case when in fact it isn't. Yeah.
I think that's a really, really good point that a lot of people should definitely think about, is don't second guess what the client's thinking or what the circumstances are if you haven't asked. So easy to ask, and if you don't ask, you've only got the bad scenario, whereas if you ask, you might come out with a better scenario.
Exactly. Yes. But we all know in tax there are times when there really isn't an option to work late, and I think what's then important is to go back to the larger plan. You know, are you generally having the work-life balance or blend that you want? And if you work really late one day, then you plan for some earlier days the following days.
Yeah, and nowadays anyway, to be honest, firms are becoming more aware of flexible working and stuff. So I think that super late evening one night can probably be compensated elsewhere in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So I think another contributor to probably lack of work-life balance stems from technology nowadays, because I would say probably most people have their work emails on their personal phones, and they maybe just check it a few times in the evening here and there, or just throughout the day on a weekend. And that probably makes it really difficult for people to switch off from work on evenings and even holidays. Do you have any tips on how to help people switch off? I suppose the obvious one is don't look at
I was about to say, it's don't do it.
Simple as that.
It's the harsh message is there's no easy way, people. You're the one who's picking up the phone and looking at it. No one's making you. Often they're not, are they? No one's standing over you going, you must look at your phone.
No, I think probably I do have my work emails on my phone, for example, as well, but I do make an effort to not look at them now on evenings. And since I've done that, you know, it's made absolutely no difference to my job at all and what people think of me. So
and how do you feel? Yeah, how do you feel?
I'm much better, you know.
Yeah.
Simple things like sleep before. If you just read an email from a client and you're thinking, God, I've got to do that tomorrow now, how am I going to approach it? It ends up just affecting, well, it used to affect my sleep anyway, and not doing that has improved that massively.
It would affect my sleep too. And I think, if you know, unless you're expecting something super urgent to come in on your work emails because there is a urgent deadline with the client, and it really is an urgent deadline, you know, as we've been talking about, then set yourself a time limit that, let's say, after 6 p.m. or whatever you want to say, you're not going to look at it. If you look at your phone for something else, exercise the self-discipline not to look at your work emails. You just go and look at Instagram, but you don't look at the emails.
Yeah.
Or you put your phone in the drawer, or
yeah.
you know, turn it off, not just put it down.
Plenty of things you can do to avoid it, can't you? And really, as we've come back to before, it's boundaries, isn't it? Set yourself those boundaries and stick to them.
Yes. Yeah.
Simple as that.
And it is as simple as that. And yet I do appreciate it isn't easy to change a habit. But what I want people to realise, and what I realised myself, is it was a habit and it had to be broken. So it might be a bit painful to start with, to break the habit of not looking at my or your work emails. It sounds like you've broken the habit now, Jack.
Yeah, just about.
And research shows that it takes between 21 days and 40 days to break a habit and put in a new one. So, you know, it isn't easy. It doesn't just happen overnight, but with continued effort over 3 to 4 weeks, or 5 or 6 weeks, depending what the habit is, then you will be able to master it.
Yeah, it is just hard in that short period of time, because you're so tempted, you're so used to just picking up your phone, clicking on your emails and going to it, but persevere.
It's like what I said earlier about if you get a vision for yourself of how your life will look, and you have a go-to phrase at these moments of temptation, try and remind yourself of your vision, your go-to phrase, and like reinforce your will to resist.
Yeah, going back to the mantra. Yes. It's my life.
Yes.
I think it's probably going to be similar when it comes to taking annual leave, but I think when a lot of people come back from holiday, they can come back to lots and lots of emails, and you know that's got a knock-on effect for when they come back, because it might make them super busy in that first week back after their holiday. Do you have any suggestions of what people can do to kind of manage that scenario where they have loads of emails that they've suddenly got to respond to when they're back from holiday?
Yeah, so you might have seen it, Jack. I've written a recent blog called How to Enjoy the Ultimate Work-Free Holiday. And I recommend putting in place some actions before you go, which would be to set up an out of office email to let people know that when you get back, you're going to have a really full email inbox. And what you would appreciate them doing is, if it is for action, so it's not just an email for information that by the time you get back from holiday isn't important anymore, you want them to resend you the email with for action in the email header on the day of your return from holiday. And then what you do, so you're getting the senders to help you manage your inbox. And what you do when you come back from holiday is you basically put all those unread messages into a new email folder within your inbox, and don't read them, and just put them all there. And then on your first day back, you'll get messages from people saying for action, and they'll be the important things to focus on. And once you've dealt with those, then you can go back and skim read and delete what was in your original inbox that you put to the side.
Yeah, it's a really good way to, I suppose, filter out those that are necessary to look at straight away, and those which don't really need much attention, which save people lots of time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it does really work. And I put this in the blog, I suggest you put in a bit of a joke in your out of office email as well, just to let people know you've got a sense of humour and you do really want them to help you. For example, saying, I'm off on holiday, so sorry that you're working. Something like that.
Is that one you've used yourself?
I've done this before, yeah. And I know somebody who, when he goes on holiday, he in his emails writes something funny about the country he's going to. So he writes, so sorry you're in the office. I'm in the land that invented the stapler. Which is Spain.
You have no idea where he is.
Exactly, which is Spain, by the way.
There we go. It's new to me. I know we've talked about a lot of different pieces of advice here to help people improve their work-life balance or blend. Have you ever received a really good piece of advice from someone that really helped you to improve your work-life balance, and what was it?
That's a nice question. It was actually, so it's not really an advice, but it was the moment when I realised I wasn't taking full responsibility for my life. And then that led to the mantra to myself. And I'll tell you what the person said to me. It wasn't advice, but somebody asked me a question. Okay. And I'm going to ask it in a minute. And what I want you to do is, you and the listeners, if you just notice the first thought that comes into your mind, because I think it's quite interesting, and I'll tell you what came into mine. The person said to me, who's the most important person in your life? And I thought my mum. And then my second thought was, gosh, I didn't think it was my husband. And then I thought, bloody hell, it's my life.
I was going to say that was my thought, but I was thinking that was a slightly selfish thought then.
No. So that's where I was in the place that other people were more important in my life than me, which would explain why I didn't have a good work-life balance, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But once I realised that, as like the wake-up call, actually it's me, then things started to change and I was able to change things.
Yeah. I'm sure that's not meaning that no one else is important in your life, but it's just remembering who the most important person is. And as you say, it's got to be yourself.
Exactly, Jack. We only get one life. Yeah.
Choose what you do with it wisely.
Exactly. Every minute counts.
It does.
The Steve Jobs, I read an interview with him, and he used to ask himself apparently every day when he looked in the mirror in the morning, having a shave, was if this were my last day alive, would this be how I want to spend my day?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, sometimes he would say no, no. But when he had more than a handful of days consecutively where he said no, he knew he needed to make a change.
That's a really interesting thought. And it comes back to, I suppose, your initial comments about it doesn't matter if you've got the odd day that doesn't go particularly how you would like it to, but looking at your life as a whole, whether you've got that balance, that's kind of in line with what Steve Jobs did by the sounds of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Different way of thinking about it, but same result.
Yeah. Exactly. Same thing. Yeah.
So all that's was really, really useful, Joe, particularly for me, and I'm sure it will be useful for everyone who listens as well. If people want to find out more about you, is there anywhere in particular they can go?
Yes, so I have a website which is www.joemorn.co.uk. You can find more about me there, and I'm a very active person on LinkedIn. I'd love people to connect with me. Just look me up and send me a connection message. And I'm also following now your LinkedIn group, Jack, so you can find me on there too.
Lovely. I can vouch that Joe is very active on LinkedIn.
I am, aren't I?
You are.
Yes.
So thanks very much again, Joe. I appreciate it.
That's a pleasure.
As Joe suggested, why not develop a go-to phrase or mantra to use in times where your work-life balance is slipping? Or maybe take a listen to Joe's free webinar on how to say no. A link to the webinar can be found in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP13. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP13, which stands for the Tax Professionals Podcast Episode 13. The show notes are created to provide you with helpful information related to the episode in a single place and contains the resources mentioned in this episode, suggested next steps or calls to action, and other useful resources. New episodes are created to help you improve your tax career at least once every 2 weeks on Mondays. If you'd like to be kept in the loop on all future episodes, you can sign up for email notifications at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. That's it for this episode. I hope you found it useful and have taken away useful tips to help you improve your tax career. Until next time.